Welcome to Value Plays Only, where Dualcaster Mage is just a 3-mana fork. First we have Cammy, playing Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. This deck looks to make infinite mana and filter it into Kinnan, putting out huge threats along the way. Her hand contains a Mox Amber, Springleaf Drum, and a Birds of Paradise. Her mulligans were not kind to her. Her London mulligans are Fierce Guardianship, Moonsilver Key, Chord of Calling, and Cyclonic Rift. Tyler is playing Magda, Brazen Outlaw. This is a rare monocolor combo tribal deck. It can piece together instant speed wins with Clock of Omens and any artifact dwarf. His hand contains an Adaptive Automaton, Sphere of Resistance, Clock of Omens, Sky Sovereign Console Flagship, Mox Opal, Mox Diamond, and Urza Saga. John is playing Captain Sisay. This is a Legends combo deck. This deck has a variety of toolbox tutor options from the command zone, as well as the ability to fetch all parts of a Gaia's Cradle or a Shaya combo. His hand contains a Birds of Paradise, Elvish Mystic, Sylvan Library, Yasharn Implacable Earth, Agatha Soul Cauldron, Soul Ring, and Iganjo Castle. This is a very speculative keep, hoping to get into a green source and then slam down a Yasharn for a win. Dan is playing Tivit, Seller of Secrets. This deck looks to slowly control the game until it can cast Tivit. From there, the deck can win with Fast as Oracle or Time Sieve. His hand contains a Windfall, Blind Obedience, Demonic Tutor, Limb Duel's Vault, Polluted Delta, Flooded Strand, and Gemstone Caverns. And with that, let's see some value plays. Dan has a pre-game action. He puts Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Limb Duel's Vault. Cammy then takes her turn. She casts a Mox Amber. Cammy has nothing else going on and passes, punished by her mulligans. Tyler plays an Urza Saga as land for turn, getting its first counter. He casts Mox Opal. Tyler then passes the turn. John plays an Iganjo Castle as land for turn. He casts a Soul Ring. He uses Soul Ring to cast Agatha's Soul Cauldron. It resolves and he passes the turn. Dan untaps and draws. He plays a Flooded Strand for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Tundra to the battlefield. He casts a Blind Obedience. Tyler sinks his head in despair, and Blind Obedience resolves. With that, Dan passes the turn. Cammy untaps and draws. She takes no game actions and has to pass again. Tyler untaps and draws. In his first main phase, Urza Saga gets its second counter. He plays Cavern of Souls, naming Dwarf as it enters. He casts his commander, Magda, Brazen Outlaw. It enters tapped, and he passes the turn. In his end step, John taps Agatha Soul Cauldron to exile Flooded Strand from Dan's graveyard. John untaps and draws. He shows the table a pile of green creatures in his hand, and takes no game actions, passing the turn. Dan untaps and plays a Polluted Delta for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up an Underground Sea. He casts a Demonic Tutor. Dan searches up a card into his hand and shuffles. The table hopes this hellish game may be over soon, and Dan passes the turn. Cammy untaps and draws. She makes her first land drop, playing a Forest for turn. She casts a Birds of Paradise. It enters tapped, and Cammy passes the turn. Tyler untaps and draws. In his first main phase, Urza Saga triggers to get its third counter. Tyler floats 1 mana with Saga in response, and then Urza Saga searches up a Universal Automaton to the battlefield tapped. Tyler casts a Sphere of Resistance. He then goes to combat and swings Magda at Dan. Magda triggers to make a tapped treasure. Dan takes 2 and Tyler passes his turn. In his end step, John activates Agatha's Soul Cauldron, exiling Demonic Tutor from Dan's grave. John untaps and draws. He now regets most of his choices and passes the turn, taking no game actions. Dan untaps and plays a Dark Ritual, paying 1 extra for Sphere of Resistance. He adds 3 black mana. He then taps out for a Rhystic Study. The table can't believe Dan tutored this card instead of a win, and it now looks like the game may just continue. Rhystic resolves, and Dan passes his turn. Cammy untaps and draws. She now can't cast Kinnan under Sphere and has to develop otherwise. She casts a Chrome Mox. Rhystic triggers and she pays. Chrome Mox enters tapped and she imprints a Thorn Mammoth. Cammy passes the turn. Tyler untaps and goes straight to combat. He swings Magda and Universal Automaton at Dan. Magda triggers twice to make 2 tapped treasures. Dan takes 4 and Tyler passes the turn. In his end step, John exiles Dark Ritual from Dan's grave. John untaps and casts Lightning Greaves. Rhystic triggers and Dan draws. John passes the turn, showing a hand of 7 green spells. Dan untaps and draws. He taps out for a Counterbalance. The table groans even more, and Dan passes the turn. Cammy untaps and casts her commander, Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy. Rhystic and Counterbalance trigger. Dan declines to reveal as Cammy shows him a card in her hand. He then draws from Rhystic. Kinnan enters tapped. Cammy then taps Mox Amber to channel Boseiju, who endures from hand, destroying Universal Automaton. Tyler searches up a mountain to the battlefield, and Cammy then passes the turn. Tyler untaps without his guaranteed win and goes into the tank. He casts a Zorn. Counterbalance and Rhystic trigger. Dan draws and then reveals a Soul Ring. Tyler goes to combat and swings Magda at Dan. Magda triggers to make a treasure. Dan takes 2 and Tyler passes. In his end step, John activates Agatha's Soul Cauldron to exile Universal Automaton from Tyler's grave. John untaps and draws. He shows yet another green card and passes, discarding to hand size. Dan untaps and draws. He casts a Soul Ring. Dan then casts Mystic Remora. The table then slams their heads at the current state of the board. He passes the turn. Kami untaps and draws. She plays Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, as land for turn. John rejoices, as he may just be able to play this game yet. Kami then casts Fabricate, Mystic, Counterbalance, and Rhystic trigger. Dan draws, then reveals a Demonic Consultation, then draws again. Fabricate resolves, and Kami fetches up a Basalt Monolith to hand, and then shuffles. Kami then taps out to cast Basalt Monolith. Rhystic, Mystic, and Counterbalance trigger. Dan reveals a Grand Arbiter Augustine IV, then draws 2 cards. Basalt Monolith resolves, but enters tapped due to Blind Obedience. The table wipes their sweat for at least one more turn. Kami passes the turn. Tyler untaps and draws. He looks over at Blind Obedience and cries out at the injustice. He decides to slow down the board himself and casts a 4-mana Tangle Wire. Counterbalance, Mystic, and Rhystic trigger. Dan draws 2 and then reveals a Mystical Tutor. Tangle Wire resolves. Tyler goes to combat and swings Magda at Dan. Magda triggers to make 2 tapped treasures. Dan then takes 2. In his second main phase, Tyler casts an Adaptive Automaton. Counterbalance and Rhystic trigger. Dan draws and then reveals Time Twister, countering Automaton. Tyler, now dejected, passes the turn. John untaps and realizes he won't get to cast spells after all. In his upkeep, Tangle Wire triggers, and John taps all of his permanents. John passes the turn, discarding the hand size. Dan untaps, and in his upkeep, Tangle Wire triggers. Dan taps down all of his mana and then draws. Dan plays Arid Mesa for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Scrubland to the battlefield. Dan passes the turn. Kami untaps, and in her upkeep, Tangle Wire triggers. In response, Kami pays 3 into Basalt Monolith to untap it. Kami then presents a loop of tapping Basalt for 4 mana through Kinnan and paying 3 to untap it. She makes 10 million bajillion colorless mana. Kami then activates Kinnan twice. Off her first flip, she finds Priest of Titania. Her second spin fails to find. Tangle Wire then resolves, tapping down the rest of her board. Still in her upkeep, she pays some of her infinite colorless mana to untap Basalt. Kami then finally draws for turn. She plays an Ancient Tomb as land for turn. She presents her loop again in main phase for infinite colorless mana. Kami casts Springleaf Drum, Mystic, Rhystic, Counterbalance trigger. Dan reveals a Windswept Teeth, and then Kami pays for both triggers. Kami then passes the turn. Tyler untaps, and in his upkeep, Tangle Wire has 2 triggers. Tyler removes a Fading counter from it, and then taps down Tangle Wire, Magda, and Sphere of Resistance. Magda triggers to make 2 treasures through Zorn. Tyler then plays a Bloodstained Mire for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a mountain. Tyler then casts Sky Sovereign, Console Flagship, Mystic, Rhystic, and Counterbalance trigger. Dan declines to reveal to help deal with Kami, and then draws 2. Sky Sovereign enters and deals 3 to Kinnan, killing it. Tyler then passes the turn. John untaps, and in his upkeep, Tangle Wire triggers. John taps down everything but Soul Ring. He draws and misses his land drop, discarding to hand size yet again. Dan untaps, and in his upkeep, Tangle Wire triggers. Dan taps down 3 lands. Remora triggers and he pays. Dan plays a Windswept Heath for turn. He pays a life and cracks it, fetching up a Hollowed Fountain, into play untapped, paying 2 life. Dan then passes, discarding to hand size. Kami untaps, and in her upkeep, Tangle Wire triggers. Kami taps down her lands. In her upkeep, Dan casts Silence, trying to keep her off Kinnan. Silence resolves, locking everyone out this turn. Kami takes no game actions and passes the turn. Tyler untaps, and in his upkeep, Tangle Wire has 2 triggers. Tyler removes a Fading counter from it, then taps down Tangle Wire and Sphere of Resistance. Tyler goes to combat, swinging Magda at Dan. Magda triggers to make 2 treasures. Dan takes 2 damage. Tyler then activates Magda, sacrificing 5 treasures, searching up a Roaming Throne, naming Dwarf as it enters. Tyler then casts Clock of Omens, Counterbalance, Rhystic, and Mystic trigger. Dan draws 2 and then reveals Polluted Delta. Clock of Omens then resolves. Luckily for the table, Tyler can't do anything else under Blind Obedience, as all of his artifacts have entered tapped. He now has to pass. John untaps, and in his upkeep, he taps down 2 artifacts. John makes a land drop finally and plays Horizon Canopy for turn. He casts Elvish Mystic, Rhystic, and Counterbalance trigger. Dan declines to show and draws. John casts a Bird's Paradise, Rhystic, and Counterbalance trigger. Dan draws and then shows a Wishclaw Talisman. With that, John passes the turn. Dan untaps, and in his upkeep, he taps down 2 lands. He doesn't pay for his Remora. Dan plays Underground River as land for turn. He casts Wishclaw Talisman. It enters with 3 counters. With that, Dan passes his turn, discarding to hand size. Kami untaps, and in her upkeep, she taps 2 lands for Tangle Wire. She casts her commander, Kinnan, Bound of Prodigy, Counterbalance and Rhystic trigger. Dan draws and then reveals a Teferi, Time Raveler. Kinnan resolves. Kami then presents her loop with Kinnan and Basalt for infinite colorless mana once again. She activates Kinnan once, putting Nezahal, Primal Tide into play. Kami plays Otawara, Soaring City as land for turn. She spins Kinnan again, putting an Elvish Mystic into play. Kami then casts a Soul Ring, Rhystic triggers, and she pays. Kami then passes the turn. Tyler untaps, and in his upkeep, Tangle Wire has 2 triggers. Tyler removes a Fading counter from it, then taps down Tangle Wire. Tyler crews Sky Sovereign with Magda and Roaming Throne. Magda triggers twice to make 2 treasures each time through Zorn, for a total of 8 treasures. He activates Magda, sacrificing 5 treasures, searching up Maskwood Nexus to the battlefield. He activates Magda again, sacrificing 5 more treasures, searching up God Pharaoh's statue. Tyler then casts Professional Facebreaker, counterbalance and Rhystic trigger. Dan draws, then reveals a Talisman of Progress. Tyler goes to combat. He swings Sky Sovereign at Dan. Sky Sovereign triggers to ping Kinnan for 3 and it dies. Dan then takes 5 and Facebreaker triggers to make 2 treasures through Zorn. In his end step, God Pharaoh triggers to ping each opponent for 1. Tyler passes the turn. John untaps and in his upkeep, Tanglewire taps down Lightning Greaves. John casts Sylvan Library, Rhystic and Counterbalance trigger. John agrees not to pay for Rhystic if Dan will decline Counterbalance. Dan doesn't reveal and then draws 1. With that, John passes. Dan untaps and in his upkeep, he taps a land to Tanglewire. He plays Ancient Tomb as land for turn. Dan takes 2 to activate Wishclaw Talisman. In response, Tyler crews Sky Sovereign with Zorn. Magda triggers twice to make 4 treasures total. Tyler activates Magda by sacrificing 5 treasures to search up a Thorn of Amethyst onto the battlefield. Dan feels further from victory than ever as he resolves Wishclaw, searching up a card to hand and giving Wishclaw to John. Dan then casts a card to make this game a bit cleaner, Smothering Tithe, for 8 mana. Nezahal triggers to draw. Tithe then resolves, and Dan passes the turn, discarding to hand size. Cammy untaps and in her upkeep, she taps a land to Tanglewire. Cammy then draws. Tithe triggers and Dan makes a treasure. Cammy then pays 9 mana for her commander, Kinnan Bonder Prodigy, yet again. Counterbalance and Rhystic trigger. Cammy pays for Rhystic and Dan reveals a Sink into Stupor. With that, Kinnan resolves. Cammy presents her favorite loop of infinite colorless mana with Basalt. Cammy floats some mana and spins Kinnan. She fails to find. Cammy activates Kinnan yet again, putting a Nyx Bloom Ancient into play. She can now activate Kinnan again, putting Hullbreaker Horde into play. The table can feel the game slipping away. Cammy then activates Kinnan again, failing to find. She then casts a Bloom Tender, Hullbreaker and Rhystic trigger. Cammy pays for Rhystic, and then Hullbreaker returns Blind Obedience to Dan's hand. Cammy then casts Mox Diamond. Hullbreaker triggers to bounce Mox Amber to hand. In response, Tyler sacrifices his 3 treasures to Professional Facebreaker to exile the top 3 cards of his library, hoping to find something. He exiles 2 lands and an unlicensed hearse. With that, Mox Amber bounces to hand. Mox Diamond then goes to grave as Cammy does not have a land to discard. Cammy then casts Mox Amber. Hullbreaker triggers to bounce Sol Ring back to her hand. Cammy now presents a loop of casting Mox Amber and Sol Ring with Hullbreaker Horror, making colored mana in between each iteration of the loop. She can use her infinite Basalt mana to pay for all of Tyler's stacks pieces. She makes infinite mana of both of her colors. Cammy then activates Kinnan over and over, putting out most of the creatures in her library, including Thrasios, Triton Hero. She activates Thrasios over and over until she draws Finale of Devastation. Cammy casts Finale of Devastation with X equals 100 million, and then attacks each of her opponents for lethal. With that, Cammy finally wins the game. So, what did we learn today? 2 turns of nothing is a good enough start as long as you make infinite mana every other turn. If you have any tips for the video, leave them below. Subscribe if you feel like it. Until next time, keep making value plays.
This game is cursed. Dude, imagine like going to YouTube and being like, yo, I'm about to watch some CEDH today. You click on this video, and the first 4 turns is like no land, a fucking Mox Opal with an Urza.
Honestly, yeah, it probably we should just like say down and read mulligans.
Yeah, okay. I think I need to just play. Okay, I got it. I'm just gonna play dwarf creatures and ladder up, and every time I play a dwarf creature,
Okay, you're getting 1 creature right now.
Right, and it's gonna enter, and I'm gonna
It's
tap
gonna
it.
enter tapped. It's gonna enter tapped. Dog, we go over this every time.
Every creature and every artifact. Is
Everything in your goddamn deck, brother. They enter tapped. You ain't doing nothing.
What is that?
Spells your opponent's cast cost 2 more.
Jesus Christ. This is miserable.
All right, so now everything costs 3.
Oh
Yeah.
my
Drop
God.
All right, I'll put a Thorn Amethyst out there. Non-creature spells cost 1 more. You laughing about it, right?
I'm just laughing about how shit this game is. Just to add 4 to every spell is insane. I feel like this has been more of a proper game than it was before.
Hard disagree.
Okay.
Yo, she did it. She won the game from not
Now-
doing
now
anything
does it
for
get posted?
3.
Yeah.
Fucking
Yeah. I'm gonna start a
I
second channel
cannot
called Dog Shit
believe
Games for Idiots.
Dan
Yeah.
did not win that game.